My life background is one that did not include church.
When I was born, I was visually impaired, and I grew up in the church all my life in an Assemblies of God church.
Every day that I lived, it was like I was living death.
My wife and I were fairly successful as far as our business, our vocation. We lived in new homes about every year or two and took a lot of trips. But there was something missing in our life. For the first 10 years of our marriage, we did not have any children, didn't think we were going to. Karen made the announcement that we were going to have a child. 3.5 years later, our second son, Jonathan, came along, and we felt very blessed. We placed Ronnie, our 5-year-old son, in a Christian nursery school, and that was against my advice. He started coming home after a few weeks, and he said, "Daddy, I'd like to pray before we have dinner." And then at nighttime, he wanted to read a Bible story that he'd brought home with some of his books, and he wanted to say a goodnight prayer. And one night in February, he climbed up on my lap. I'm sitting in my family room, and he says, "Daddy, I want to ask you a question." And he says, "Daddy, when are you going to get saved?" And I thought, you know, I don't see a real need. I'm living a good life. I'm a good person. I could feel the heat coming up the back of my head, and I says, "Ronnie, who told you to ask Daddy that?" And he says, "Nobody did, Daddy." And I said, "Now don't lie to me. I want to know who told you to come home and ask me that question." And about this time, I saw a couple little tears come up in the corner of his eye. And then he looked at me and he says, "Daddy, I love you, and I don't want you to go to hell." I was under conviction. No matter where I went, I'd be in my truck driving to the construction sites or this or that, or I'd be at home. I got up abnormally early on Sunday morning. I think we only had 3 channels on our TV, and I went in and turned them on. There was 3 ministers speaking, and I cannot tell you, maybe I'll know when I get to heaven, who the one was. But he just pointed his finger at me, and he said, "Dads, I'm talking to you. What does your wife and children see at night when you get home?" I know what my kids see, and it wasn't what I wanted them to see. I got up out of that chair right then, walked into the bedroom and said, "Karen, do you want to go to church this morning?" We went that morning. Karen stepped out at the first sign of invitation, walked forward and rededicated her life. As soon as church was over, Pastor Bobby came and made a line for me, and he said, "Ron, if there's anything that I can do for you, anywhere, anytime," he said, "I'm available." And I said, "Well, I'd like to talk to you right now if we could." I dropped to my knees and I said, "God, I don't know what I have to offer you, but whatever it is, it's yours. And I want to spend the rest of my life serving you."
I was very involved in the church youth group and things like that. So I had the opportunity to go to Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and I felt pretty strong in my faith when I left. When I got out there, I didn't know anyone, and made the mistake of not getting plugged in with a church or a Christian group on campus right away. I'd gotten plugged in with these groups of friends that didn't have the same values as I did. I got caught up in the whole party scene with the drinking and the, and girls and all that. There was no happiness. There was a lot of depression and things that I was dealing with because of that. There was no telling the difference between me and somebody else, who had not come from a Christian background. Well, the last semester of college, I studied in Spain, and it was probably one of the greatest opportunities for my life, but it was one of the biggest party semesters for me. It was probably the peak of living away from him. I think I was home maybe 2 weeks, and I was sitting in the Sunday morning service, and I can't tell you what the pastor was talking about, but I remember just in the middle of service, God just kind of prodding my heart and being like, "Hey, what have you been doing? How have you been living? Who have you become? And, you know, and I didn't have an answer. I went home from that service and I spent time by myself in my room, you know, just repenting, asking for that forgiveness and asking for Him to take over my life. I guess I would just say that He's so ready to forgive. At least, you know, like I experienced that so clearly.
I didn't have any hope per day. It was waking up and smoking a joint and doing a line. A neighbor came to pick me up every day for church because she had told me, oh, I see that you don't have a car and I can drive you there. And I thought, okay, I'll go for service. Well, it so happened that she went to Sunday school. We were reading the book of Nehemiah, and in the book of Nehemiah it talked about how they were rebuilding the walls and about how they confessed their sins to one another and to God. As I was reading His word, He became so real to me. My marriage was a shambles, and He wasn't even living with me anymore.
If we didn't have drugs, we were fighting all the time. Our lives were horrible at our house. We were on and off, separated and back together, separated and back together.
I thought if I could just say out loud to somebody that I was a meth addict, or that I couldn't get through my day without smoking marijuana, if I could just say it out loud and they wouldn't judge me, you know. And God, if you'll save my marriage, then I'll make sure that even if I'm not driven to church, then I'll take my kids to church. And I dropped to my knees because all I heard was God tell me to stop bargaining with Him. I gave my entire life over to Him. I finally confessed to Him that it was my fault that I was on drugs. It wasn't my husband's fault. I knew without him even saying it out loud to me that he could forgive me. I knew that he could give me a brand new life. The first thing I wanted to do was go tell Chris that I was saved. He wasn't anywhere around. I'd been avoiding his phone calls.
She came and called me one morning, or one afternoon I believe it was, and said, Chris, I found the Lord, and He's helping me through all this, and He's changed my life. And I thought she was a freak. I thought, well, some people need that, but not me. I can handle this on my own.
Well, my husband, in the end, he started coming to church just because he knew I was going to that church.
I would sit in the church, and a lot of people there, but every word that was coming out of the pastor's mouth was directed right towards me. I felt like this guy's following me around.
I know that God wants every single person to turn to Him, but I thought Chris was done. I thought he was beyond help.
I felt that I was unforgiven, that there was no forgiving me because I'd already crossed that line. And when I gave my heart to the Lord, when I went down that morning and I dumped all my stuff out to Him, I stood up after that and I felt that I was truly, truly forgiven. I felt light. I felt like all this weight, the weight of sin had fallen off my shoulders.
Every good thing that's happened to me in our lifetime has been a result of that decision I made.
There's just such a joy knowing that the God who created you for a purpose, that you're in that purpose, and you're on track for what He wants you to do and how He wants to use you.
Salvation is a free gift. It saved me, it saved my marriage, and we're just two people on the planet.
Yeah.
We're just two people on the planet. He did it for everybody.